I want people to remember when they're buying a tripod, any kind of support system, they need to think about what's the cost of what's going on the top of it. And Cartoni's one of those companies that believes that same philosophy. I mean, you don't go out and buy a $200 or $300 tripod if you're going to put $6,000, $7,000, $10,000, $20,000 worth of gear on the top of it. I always tell people the tripod should cost as much as the gear you put on the top of it, because it's a good way to understand what the cost and weight of that object are. The other thing is that these tools, when you buy good ones, they last for life.
Tell me about Cartoni. What do they do?
Well, Cartoni is a major manufacturer of tripods and pedestal systems. They're not as well known in the United States outside of broadcast television. They're very, very popular in the broadcast industry on their pedestal contents, but they're not really known as well in the cinematic industries. And one of the things that Cartoni is really known for is the power of their tools and the ability of their tools to be professionally made and all of that. Italians have a flair for design, and the tools show it. They're incredibly well made, engineered, they're lightweight, they're efficient, and they've been in use for almost more than 50 years now. So it's a well-established company. It's just a lot of people in the United States don't know who Cartoni is.
What have you got that's new for us?
One of the cool things that I'm happy to be sharing is that Cartoni has started producing a line of encoded tripod heads. Now, they've had this kind of technology for the broadcast world for a long time. But as we move farther and farther to in-camera visual effects, the use of Unreal Engine as a background for film and television production, Cartoni saw a place that had a big void in it. Camera tracking systems for this new world of background projection, for lack of a better phrase. It's just an update for rear projection. This new world of in-camera visual effects where we're encoding camera data and lens data and all this other thing. One of the things that's been left out from the manufacturers is the pan and tilt controls. The camera tracking systems, whether they're Stipe or Moses or any of the tools that are used in virtual production, they have limits on when they see tilt and pan. And most of the time, they can't see a movement that's less than 10 or 15 degrees, which is a pretty broad range of movement. Cartoni's come out and encoded these heads, starting with the original Lambda head that's seen on a lot of techno cranes. But they came out with these products for the broadcast world, and they're now developing a product called the E-Maxima series that's now giving lens and camera with positional data to be fed into Unreal Engine or into a broadcast system that understands that data. So it's a whole new world of technology, but it's an extension of what we already do with lens and camera metadata.
Why is that information important? Now, I also know that we're making the transition from green screen to volumes, which I think is actually a wonderful idea because everybody gets a better idea of what the environment is. But why is being able to translate all of that camera position data so important if you're shooting against a volume as opposed to green screen?
That actually brings up a really good point, because what happens is when you shoot it is Unreal Engine understands where the camera position is and what the focal length of the lens is. And it gives you a smaller area on this large screen called a frustum. This is a high resolution area that's directly behind the actors, but it's defined by the lens parameters and camera parameters. And now having that ability to do a finer control for a pan or tilt gives that much more data for the system to understand, to be able to mimic it later or to give you proper movement. If you have a limited amount of data that's coming in when you're panning the camera, you may get a reoccurrence of judder in the image. And remember, because you're shooting against what's essentially a video screen, you might get jumps in how the frame looks. And so this adding the encoding for panning and tilting adds that extra level of nuance that we're trying to get. It's an evolution in the modern aspects of cinematography.
In other words, when I'm shooting against a volume, I'm not shooting the entire picture. The whole volume is not in focus.
Correct.
It's just giving me just the piece that the camera sees.
Right, and the part around that is at lower resolution to enhance reflections and give character mode. It allows you to see things. A good example is The Mandalorian, which is what everybody knows started this. The area behind him is higher resolution than the rest of the volume, but the rest of the volume is needed to reflect in the armor because it's polished chrome. Think about that when it's a glass with ice in it, you're doing a shot, or it's something where you have transparency in someone's glasses. There's a number of different areas where you see that. Reflections on a tabletop, reflections on the ground can now be mimicked in the studio in a way that you've never been able to do before. But when you talk about how productions like The Batman, with Greg Fraser did, Robert Pattinson version, where the entire car chase scene at the end of the project is shot virtually. It's all shot on a production stage against an LED wall, and all the effects are real time. This process of doing that, having that extra data, whether it's the pan and tilt data or the camera position data, gives you better information in post and allows you to do exactly what we do with normal footage. You shoot it and then cut it. There's no more, you're not having to add extra visual effects to it. You're not having to do color correction into any way independently. And you're not having to spend time actually making sure that the shots match, because you're shooting it in camera like you would this interview.
That is very cool.
And it's really powerful, Larry, because as we've evolved in all of this, I mean, you and I go back to pre-digital days. And now as we started taking, the camera and lens metadata and adding the wall metadata and the metrics from within Unreal Engine, you're marrying all of these aspects together, and we're just adding the one part that's been left out. With Cartoni, this ability to do this, it's 4 million parameters in a 360-degree circle of how much they can process data. Oversampled to an extreme when you're really only talking about a degree at a time. But that oversampling gives you smoother movement and better controls. And pan and tilt is one of the things that the camera tracking manufacturers, Moses, Stipe, the other ones that make these tools for this project, these kinds of projects, they don't necessarily think of a pan and tilt as something that's going to be very accurate. They're okay if it's a long pan, but if it's short pan, it's a quick shot, they may not be able to translate the data fast enough. So having this extra incoming data gives you better picture, gives you a better result, gives you a better output. And that's what Cartoni's about, is to add another step to the technology that's being produced.
Well, do I have to be shooting a video wall to consider buying Cartoni?
No, you don't. And that's actually one of the great parts of it. One of the things we tell people is the encoded heads come that way either way. And they're sizes that you would use for normal broadcast and episodic work. And you can have it for the future. If you don't need to use the encoding now, you can just cover up the caps and the lens and access that information later. And they make tripods in a range from very, very light ones, 75 millimeter balls that weigh under 5 kilos, 10 pounds, to all the way up to full systems for pedestals which weigh hundreds of pounds, hundreds of kilos. But it's the way to think about it. And they make a very fine tools. They have a really great carbon fibers studio, and their carbon fiber stuff tends to run a little bit lighter than other manufacturers of the same kind style of products. Because when you get into big tripods, they're kind of heavy. Even the carbon fiber ones are kind of heavy. And to see when you start shaving weight off that, to be able to, for transportation, for movement, for the crew, the back of the crew, we always think about those things as we go forward.
How do you see the media industry evolving? It's under a lot of stress right now.
God,
and
isn't it?
Nobody's really sure where the future's going, but what's your sense of where we're headed?
You have to look at a couple of cornerstones in our industry. One of them was the advent of DV. We started using DV. That kind of changed the market space. It allowed us to do a different thing. And then we went to tapeless production, where the tape factories got wiped out, and all of a sudden we're doing direct to digital things. I think this is just another evolution in it. And the reality of it is that using Unreal Engine for a background against a video wall is no different than what Charlie Chaplin did, or what the bicycle scene from Gone with the Wind, not Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz. You've seen this kind of technology before, but it's not the bad rear projection that you got in Big Bang Theory. Now we can actually get realistic work, and it's like in Chicago, where I'm from, one of the production studio, Smash Virtual, does all of the interior process trailer stuff, the car movement inside automobiles for Dark Matter, the series on Apple TV. They've done stuff for Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, because it's kind of cold in the winter in Chicago. And having this virtualized background where you can use it and you can bring a fire truck or an ambulance or something in, you can now have an environment that's safe for actors, safe for crew, and do this. But the other advent is we haven't gotten to the smaller size walls yet. We still talk about them as volumes, which are hundreds of meters. It's like, no, it doesn't need to be that big. A smaller wall can be used much, much more efficiently. And Unreal Engine is on everybody's television set. Right now, there's a hurricane coming in Florida. Weather Channel is pretty good to go. You go to the Weather Channel, and they have these virtualized production sets that all use the same technology on broadcast every day. Where they can show how high the water is and what it means. And it gives a better explanation for people in emergency situations to know how and when they should evacuate. So the technology, we're using it now. We're just taking it from television and broadcast into cinematic world. And that's the power of what Cartoni does. They have more than 11 products that have this encoded capability. Mostly on the broadcast side, but as they started to bring in the things for cinema and episodic television, it's given them a new look at what life is and how that technology can be used in the future. But our industry is changing for it. I mean, we started with TV, and now we've got content creators. As much as you look around the show here at NAB New York, a lot of small production companies. We've gone to smaller, lighter, more compact industry to produce a lot of the content that everyone sees. Why not be able to leverage all of the technologies in what we do, much like you do?
What one thought about Cartoni do you want people to keep in mind at the end of this interview?
People need to look at other brands. I mean, there's been so many brands of tripods out there, and somebody is always looking for the lowest cost. It's not always the best thing. I want people to remember when they're buying a tripod, any kind of support system, they need to think about what's the cost of what's going on the top of it. And Cartoni's one of those companies that believes that same philosophy. I mean, you don't go out and buy a $200 or $300 tripod if you're going to put $6,000, $7,000, $10,000, $20,000 worth of gear on the top of it. I always tell people the tripod should cost as much as the gear you put on the top of it, because it's a good way to understand what the cost and weight of that object are. The other thing is that these tools, when you buy good ones, they last for life. And that's something I think particularly people getting into the industry and understanding is that, buying a Cartoni tripod, that's a little more than you might think it need to be expense-wise, will last you much, much longer than a very, very inexpensive one that you're going to have to get rid of when it falls apart sometime soon. But Cartoni's been real popular in the broadcast world and very popular outside the United States. We're just trying to make their knowledge known a little bit more in the United States.